When you wake up in the morning, the very first voice you hear is your own. Before you check your phone, before you speak to anyone else, before the world gets a chance to define you, it's your mind that begins shaping the day. And what most people don't realize is this: your inner dialogue, that constant stream of words you direct toward yourself, has more influence on your life than almost anything else. Because the truth is, your brain listens to you more than it listens to anybody else. Think about that for a second. The things you tell yourself, whether out loud or silently, they don't just evaporate into the air. They take root, they form beliefs, they carve grooves into your thought patterns, the same way water carves a canyon over time. And once that groove is deep enough, it becomes the automatic path your mind follows. That's why some people stay stuck in self-doubt, while others seem to radiate confidence. It's not always because life handed them different circumstances. It's because life handed them different words, and they kept repeating those words until they became their truth. Now imagine this. For 3 days, you catch yourself every single time you're about to criticize yourself, and instead, you replace it with encouragement. You drop the line, "I can't do this," and you say, "I'm learning to handle this." You catch the thought, "I'm not enough," and you change it to, "I'm growing stronger every day." It may sound small, but those subtle shifts are the beginning of rewriting the script of your life. You see, the brain doesn't argue with you. It doesn't push back and say, "Wait, is that statement accurate?" It simply accepts what you give it and begins building from there. That's why when you repeat negativity long enough, your brain builds a home out of it. But when you feed it words of strength, of growth, of possibility, it builds something different, a foundation you can actually stand on. Some people might dismiss this and say, "That's just positive thinking." No, it's much more than that. Positive thinking is surface level. What I'm talking about is reprogramming. This is psychology at work. Neuroscience shows us that the brain creates new pathways based on repetition. Every time you choose a different word, every time you swap out a self-criticism for a self-affirmation, you are literally reshaping your brain's wiring. And in just 3 days, you can begin to feel that shift. Day 1, it feels awkward. It feels unnatural, like you're lying to yourself. That's because your old grooves are so deep. You've been talking down to yourself for so long that encouragement feels foreign. But by day 2, you'll notice something. It doesn't feel quite as forced anymore. You begin catching yourself a little quicker. By day 3, it starts to feel lighter. You don't just say different words, you feel them, and that's when the power of self-talk stops being theory and becomes your lived reality. Philosophers have been saying this for centuries in different ways. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. What you feed your mind shapes the essence of who you are. If you keep telling yourself you're weak, you will live like a weak person. If you keep telling yourself you're growing, you will live like someone who grows. And the incredible thing is, you are the only one who has control over what those words are. This is not about ignoring your flaws. This is not about pretending that pain doesn't exist. It's about speaking to yourself in a way that allows growth instead of shutting it down. You can acknowledge your struggles and still talk to yourself with compassion. You can admit where you've failed and still call yourself forward with strength. That balance, truth mixed with encouragement, that is where transformation happens. So for 3 days, I'm asking you to test this. Talk to yourself like someone who actually matters. Talk to yourself like you would talk to someone you love, someone you're responsible for, someone whose future depends on your words. Because it does. If you can do this for just 3 days, you'll see it's not just about changing your language. It's about reclaiming control of your mind. Because here's the bottom line, your inner voice is the architect of your life. Every brick of confidence, every wall of resilience, every room of peace is built with the words you choose. If you change the conversation, you change the construction. So start today. For 3 days, speak life, speak strength, speak growth into yourself. Because when you talk to yourself like someone worth listening to, you become someone worth becoming. When you talk to yourself, you're not just filling silence, you're shaping an identity. Every sentence you repeat to yourself is a brushstroke on the canvas of who you are becoming. The danger is that most people are painting with words they didn't even choose. They're echoing things they've heard from parents, teachers, critics, or failures from the past, and they don't even realize it. That inner voice is not always your own. It's often a collection of other people's voices you've allowed to move in rent-free. And here's the problem. When you keep rehearsing those words, they become the lens through which you see yourself, and eventually, the lens through which you see the world. If you want to know who you'll be in 5 years, just listen to the way you're talking to yourself right now. Because your words are not just describing your life, they're directing it. They create the blueprint of your identity. And your mind, being the loyal builder it is, goes to work following those instructions. Think about how powerful this is. A person who tells themselves every morning, "I'm overwhelmed, I'm drowning, I'll never catch up," will live like someone who is constantly behind, constantly gasping for air. Their body responds to that script with tension, stress, and fatigue. But a person who says, "I am capable, I'm learning to handle what's in front of me, I can grow through this," lives from a different center. They walk differently, they breathe differently, they make choices differently. Same circumstances, different self-talk, different identity. And here's the deeper truth. Your brain doesn't care whether what you're saying is objectively true. It cares that it's repeated. What's repeated becomes remembered. What's remembered becomes believed. And what's believed becomes lived. That's the cycle. That's why 3 days of intentional words can make such a dramatic difference. You're interrupting an old cycle and beginning a new one. For these 3 days, speak to yourself as if you already are the person you want to be. Not in a fake or delusional way, but in a way that aligns with growth. If you want to be stronger, tell yourself, "I am building strength." If you want to be wiser, say, "I am learning to see clearly." If you want to be more resilient, remind yourself, "I rise when life pushes me down." When you put those words in front of you, your identity begins to lean toward them. You become pulled toward the person you are describing. This is not wishful thinking, it's self-fulfilling thinking. The words you use to describe yourself create the standards for your behavior. If you tell yourself you're lazy long enough, you'll live into that role. If you tell yourself you're disciplined, even before you fully believe it, you'll start making decisions that align with discipline. You are, in many ways, a story you keep retelling yourself. So ask, what story are you rehearsing, and is it one worth living out? The philosophers understood this long before psychology gave us the science to prove it. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, then do what you have to do." In other words, your identity is written in words before it is proven in actions. Speak it, then live it. This is not arrogance, it's responsibility. It's claiming ownership of your inner narrative. For 3 days, write the blueprint carefully. Speak in ways that honor your future, not just your past. Don't recycle words of shame that someone else once gave you. Don't let yesterday dictate today's identity. Instead, give your mind a new script to follow. Tell yourself you are becoming more than you were. Tell yourself you are capable of meeting the challenge. Tell yourself you have value that no failure can erase. The shift is subtle, but it's profound. When you view yourself as someone who is growing, instead of someone who is stuck, you approach obstacles with curiosity instead of despair. When you believe you're capable, you try harder, stay longer, and persevere when most people would quit. Your identity becomes the engine that carries you through the storm, and here's what's remarkable. You don't even need to have everything figured out to start this process. You don't need the perfect plan, you don't need all the confidence in the world, you just need words. Words that aim you in the right direction, words that remind you of what's possible, words that, when repeated over 3 days, start to sound less like theory and more like truth. So ask yourself, what kind of life do you want to build? Because the words you speak to yourself are laying the foundation right now. If you speak weakness, you will live weak. If you speak strength, you will live strong. If you speak growth, you will live expanding instead of shrinking. That's why I'm asking you to make these 3 days count. Talk to yourself as though your words are constructing the person you're destined to be, because they are. And if you ever wonder whether this works, remember this: the words you choose today will echo tomorrow. Speak wisely. Every single one of us has an inner critic, that voice that shows up the moment we stumble, the one that says, "See, I told you, you always fail." It's quick, it's sharp, and it's relentless. But here's the truth most people never stop to realize: that critic is not some ultimate authority. It's just a voice you've rehearsed so many times that it sounds believable, and the more you listen to it, the louder it gets. What if, instead of letting that critic dominate, you treated every negative thought as a chance to redirect? Think of it like training a muscle. At first, it feels heavy, unnatural, even exhausting to resist the old patterns. But the more you practice, the stronger that redirection becomes. Every time you catch yourself saying, "I failed," and you replace it with, "I learned what doesn't work," you're strengthening a new mental habit. You're teaching your brain to reframe, to look at situations through a lens of growth instead of defeat. This isn't about pretending everything is fine when it's not. It's not about sugarcoating pain or denying struggle. It's about being honest in a way that still leaves room for possibility. You can admit you made a mistake without turning it into a verdict about your worth. You can say, "That didn't go the way I hoped," while also saying, "And here's what I can do differently next time." That shift in language changes the trajectory of your mindset. Here's where psychology backs this up. Cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most researched approaches to mental health, works on this exact principle. The idea that if you can change your thoughts, you can change your emotions, and your behavior and thoughts are nothing more than words you repeat to yourself. Redirecting negativity is not just motivational talk, it's mental conditioning. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're working on something important and it collapses. The first thought that rushes in might be, "I'm terrible at this. I can't get it right." That's the critic. But what happens if you pause and replace it with, "This is tough, but I'm gaining experience," or "Every attempt is bringing me closer to the solution"? Suddenly, your emotional state shifts. You feel less trapped, more capable, more willing to keep going. And that shift isn't trivial. It's the difference between quitting and persevering. The same applies to identity level thoughts. Maybe you've carried a belief for years like, "I'm not good enough," or "I'll never be successful." The moment that thought shows up again, you have a choice. Let it echo unchallenged or confront it with a new script. You can say, "That's the old story, but I'm writing a new one." Even if it feels awkward, even if you don't fully believe it yet, the repetition begins to carve a new groove. And just like water reshaping stone, those new grooves eventually redefine the landscape of your mind. What's incredible is how quickly you start to feel the effects. By the second day of practicing this, you'll notice the critic's words don't land with the same weight. They're still there, but they're softer, weaker, less convincing. By the third day, you start to feel something different. Not that the critic is gone, but that you no longer need to obey it. You realize you can redirect, you realize you can choose. That realization alone is life changing, and there is a deeper, almost philosophical layer to this. Every time you redirect a negative thought into a growth, focused one, you're exercising free will. You're refusing to be a prisoner of old scripts written by fear, failure, or other people's opinions. You're declaring, I am not defined by what went wrong. I am defined by what I choose to do next. That act of choosing is what makes us human. It's what separates a life that shrinks from a life that expands. So for these 3 days, treat every negative thought as an opportunity. Don't see it as proof of weakness. See it as a trigger to practice strength. Don't get discouraged when the critic shows up. Expect it. Then answer it with words that move you forward. That's how reprogramming works, not by eliminating negativity, but by retraining your response to it. Because at the end of the day, life is not determined by the presence of negative thoughts. Everybody has them. What matters is what you do when they arrive. Do you let them dictate your identity, or do you redirect them into growth? Here's the bottom line. Negativity is inevitable, but submission to it is optional. Choose the redirection. Train your voice, and in time, that critic that once felt so powerful will become nothing more than background noise. The hardest part of change isn't starting. It's staying consistent long enough to feel the difference. That's why I framed this challenge around just 3 days. 3 days is short enough for your mind to agree to it, but long enough for you to feel the beginning of a shift. And that's all you need, because once you experience that shift, once you feel the difference that intentional self-talk makes, you'll want to keep going. On the first day, everything feels forced. You notice how quickly your inner critic speaks up. You realize how many times you casually dismiss yourself or reduce your worth without even thinking. That awareness can be uncomfortable, but it's also powerful. It means you're finally paying attention. You can't change what you don't notice, and day 1 is about noticing. By day 2, something begins to loosen. You're still catching yourself, still redirecting, but it feels a little less like a battle. You start to recognize patterns. The same negative phrases come up again and again, and you learn to anticipate them. You can almost hear them forming before they arrive. That anticipation makes redirection faster. You're not just reacting, you're training. And then day 3 arrives, and you feel something you didn't expect, lightness. The words you've been repeating start to feel less like a script and more like a belief. For the first time, you don't just say, I'm growing stronger. You feel a flicker of strength inside. For the first time, you don't just repeat, I'm learning. You notice yourself actually responding with patience instead of judgment. That's when the power of consistency reveals itself. 3 days may sound small, but it's long enough for your brain to prove to you that change is possible. Consistency is the bridge between who you are and who you want to be. It's not about perfection, it's about momentum. Too often, people give up because they expect transformation overnight. They try to overhaul everything in a single leap, and when it doesn't stick, they quit. But the truth is, real change doesn't come in leaps. It comes in layers. It comes in small, repeated actions that compound over time. And self-talk is no different. That's why 3 days is powerful. It shows you that momentum is possible. It's like striking a match in a dark room. At first, it's just a flicker, but keep feeding it, and soon you have a fire. The consistency of speaking life into yourself builds that fire, and once you see it burning, you won't want to go back to the dark. There's also a deeper reason why consistency matters. It builds trust with yourself. Most people don't realize how many promises they've broken with themselves over the years. They say, "I'll change," but they don't. They say, "I'll do better tomorrow," but tomorrow comes and goes. Over time, that breaks something inside. You stop believing your own words. But when you stay consistent, even for 3 days, you start rebuilding that trust. You prove to yourself, when I say I'm going to do this, I actually follow through. And that self-trust is the foundation of confidence. Now, let's be honest. Life will test this. After 3 days, the old voice will still be there, waiting. The critic doesn't vanish. The doubts don't disappear. But here's the difference. Now you have evidence. You've already experienced what happens when you speak differently to yourself. You know the lightness, the shift, the strength. And that memory becomes your anchor. It reminds you that you're capable of choosing this path again and again. Think of it like planting a seed. 3 days is enough to break the surface, enough to see a sprout. But if you stop watering it, it withers. If you stay consistent, it grows into something unshakable. The words you repeat are that water. The habit of speaking life is the sunlight, and the consistency is what allows the roots to dig deep enough to withstand the storms. The truth is, you won't notice transformation in a single day. You won't see it all in a week, but in 3 days, you can feel the start of it. And once you've felt it, you know the direction, you know the path is real. That knowledge is enough to keep going. So don't underestimate what 3 days of consistent self-talk can do. It's not just an exercise, it's a doorway. Once you step through it, you see that the words you choose aren't just sounds in your head, they are building blocks. They are foundations. They are the architecture of a stronger, wiser, more resilient you. And that's the challenge I leave with you. Stay consistent. For 3 days, talk to yourself as if your life depends on it, because it does. Keep going, and those 3 days will turn into weeks, those weeks into months, and eventually, that voice you once had to force will become the natural rhythm of your mind. Because transformation doesn't begin in the world outside you, it begins in the words inside you, and once you've changed your words, you've already changed your world.